Hey, Creekside Church. Here is the Spark Notes, the quick version, because I know that we don't all have time or attention spans, and sometimes we've got kids running all over the place, so we're making this quick. This is simple. This is this Sunday's message in less than 5 minutes. So here we go. Let's see if I can do it. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the threat to the scattered church in 1 Peter. We're in the last week of our I Will Build My Church series. We're looking at the threats facing the scattered church, and we're looking at how the greatest threat facing the scattered church is that they would be isolated. And the reason why that's a threat is because we're made to live in community. You look at the Garden of Eden, God's looking around and he says, something's off here. I've designed this perfectly for Adam to thrive, but something's not working. And he says, you know what he needs? He needs Eve, because it's not good for man to be alone. And then they become this partnership that cares for the garden, and God says, this is very good. Because God, in his design for human beings, designed them to be in community as well. So that's why isolation is so threatening, because isolation threatens to impact. It threatens to impact your sense of self. It threatens to impact your sense of identity, and it threatens you kind of backsliding into some things that you're not. So we looked at this passage in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. You can look at it later if you want to. And what it says is he starts with some identity statements for the scattered church, and then he addresses some behavior issues that he fears they might slip into, some sin issues he fears they might slip into in isolation, because that's the threat. You will slip back into sin issues. You will slip back into living purposelessly in isolation. That's the threat of isolation. So how does he combat this? He combats this with identity. He combats this with identity, and this is what he says. He says, you belong to this huge group of people. He identifies things like a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. He says there's this large group of people. That's who you belong to. And why do you belong to that group of people? You belong to that group of people because God chose you. This is what Peter's laying out. He's laying out the fact that whose the scattered church is, who they belong to. So whose they are leads to who they are. Whose they are leads to who they are, and who they are leads to what they do, right? So he's saying God has chosen you. That's whose you are. You belong to this mighty, holy, precious, all-powerful King of all kings. That's who you belong to, which means that you're a son and a daughter. You're an heir. You have power, right? Like you have access to all of these things, which means that what you do is you live like a kingdom ambassador, no matter what seasons come your way, no matter how isolated you feel. Whose you are leads to who you are, which leads to what you do. And Peter's writing this because the very threat of isolation that can happen is that we begin to think that what we do leads to who we are. That what we do leads to who we are. We start looking at our backslid actions, our broken responses to our family members, broken habits that are beginning to show up and surface in our lives. And in isolation, we say, that's actually who I am. Isolation has shown me who I really am. I am the things that I do. I am the things that I do, which means, what do I belong to? Nothing but worthlessness. I'm nothing. I'm worthless. I'm not worth loving. That's who I am. That's what I belong to. And so what Peter's addressing is that isolation will have the propensity to make you see your identity backwards, that what you do leads to whose you are, when it's actually whose you are. The gospel message is whose you are leads to what you do. So that's what we looked at. I encouraged our church family to lean into any time over isolation that we're beginning to feel a sense of looking and judging ourselves based off of what we're doing, that we would try to reverse that script and say, no, it's not what I do that defines who I am. It's whose I am, right? It's whose I am that defines who I am. So that's what we got to do. In isolation, we got to flip that script like Peter was saying, because he's writing to a group that's more isolated than us. And last but not least, you have the ability to be more connected than this group of people ever did, because they couldn't go outside. They didn't have FaceTime. They didn't have Zoom. Check in with people, challenge people, lean in to community however you can. Hop on Zoom with your gospel community. If you serve as a spiritual father or mother to a group of people, check in with them. And if you have a spiritual father or mother, you need to check in with them. Let them challenge you. That's the quick and dirty version for those of us who don't have that much time. I love you guys. Hope to see you soon. Bye.